Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks to everybody who's here in the audience, who's hopefully have your attention for the next half hour. Appreciate you taking some time. My name is Ben Schrag. I'm one of the program directors in the SBIR program and the STTR program at the National Science Foundation. I'm one of 12. All of us are kind of full-time with these programs. And my goal here really is I'm not going to go into nearly as much detail as we heard from some of the prior folks. Happy to talk about process and logistics and budgets and proposal prep and documents. That's all something I'm happy to take offline. What I really want to do today is try to give you all like the very first 60,000 foot view of our program. So really to get you to understand what we care about, what's really important to us, and how to kind of get a sense about whether you might be a good fit for the National Science Foundation. Obviously, as you can tell from our name, it's not as obvious what specifically we're looking for as I suspect, for example, the NIH, just because we don't have a specific type of problem or technology embedded in our name. So I'm going to cover the very basics, and if you guys want to dive deeper into proposal prep or anything else, feel free to ask about anything you want in the Q&A. My contact information is also here on the slide. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to us anytime, ask questions. There's never a problem with you guys contacting us. So real quickly, couple takeaways. This is a really long, wordy mission statement. The key things to remember about NSF, number one is that we're looking for really risky, really high impact technology. We're looking for folks who are applying for SBIR and STTR to bring to us technology that is unproven, that may not ever work because there's something about building it that's so difficult that even the experts in that field might not be able to pull it off. So something that is hard to do and hard to build, and the product or service is something that you're not sure you can actually make it work the right way. That's actually a level of risk we're looking for. If you know that your product is going to work, you just need some money to kind of do more straightforward development or engineering, then you may actually be too low risk for us. So we're looking for that high risk. We're looking for the technology once it's developed to be groundbreaking in the sense that you're going to really transformatively impact your market. Your product's not going to be 10% better than what's out there. It's going to be 10 times better. It's going to be qualitatively different. And it's going to really create a very big competitive advantage for you in the market that you're targeting. As you've also heard earlier today, we provide funding for R&D only. So you have to also be able to show to us how, obviously, how our funding, what kind of R&D you're going to do, what questions you're going to answer, what things you're going to prove out about your technology, your product. And therefore, you're going to have to really show us how doing R&D is a critical thing for your company to be commercially successful right now. The last thing, that maybe the most important thing on the slide, is the last two words, commercial success. We are very commercially focused at the National Science Foundation. The only value that we really see, that the impact that we see being created by our portfolio companies on the world only happens if they're commercially successful. If they're not able to find a product that their customers and users will buy that will solve a problem for them, they do not have impact. The impact is only through commercialization. And so everything you guys should do with NSF should be through the lens of understanding how your commercial success is going to be improved. Your chances will be made better. Your commercialization will be made stronger because of our support. That's the name of the game. So it's a little bit counterintuitive because we are the National Science Foundation, but doing science is actually at best a side effect of funding in the SBIR program and not a goal. We're not as big as the NIH. We fund about 400 projects per year, about $200 million total at the door. And we have about a little over $250,000 phase one and $1 million phase two, with the chance to get additional funding if your phase two is going well. That'll bring you up closer to $2 million in total. I'm gonna hit a couple really important aspects of our program that I think are maybe unusual or unique in some cases. So we fund across the board. We fund essentially, as I mentioned, we're looking for high-risk technology, we're looking for innovation, and we're looking for commercial impact. As soon as you have those things, we will fund you whatever topic, whatever market vertical you happen to be targeting. And so you can see it's quite a broad set of things. And as the companies here are obviously most interested in about a quarter of our portfolio is in the life sciences, and that includes funding almost everything NIH would support. I think we would support. Sometimes the stage is a little different. The only thing we don't fund that the NIH would maybe fund is we don't fund clinical trials especially of human, therapeutics. But we do fund drug discovery, we fund drug delivery, we fund biomedical technologies, medical devices, digital health, a lot of the places that you'll find also at NIH. Another thing that's important to keep in mind, really important piece of our program that's, I think, unique again, is that we are very focused on startups. So as you can see here, all the awards we made in 2020, more than half of them were actually the first proposal that organization had ever submitted to the NSF. It's the first shot. This is a very rare thing. This is not the case at other agencies. And so we try to be very forgiving and very flexible with people who have not worked with the government before. We're not looking for you to be experts at government grants or grantsmanship. You don't have to go through this process 15 times to get to know it. We really want to be open to first-time startups and also to a lot of first-time entrepreneurs. As again, I mentioned, new companies, small companies are also kind of the center of mass for us. The median company we funded in phase 1 last year had 2 employees. And most of the companies we funded were also quite new in terms of their foundation. So it's hard to be, you don't have to be established, and it's kind of hard to be too early in your company to apply, but it is possible to be too late. If your technology starts to get to the place where it's proven out and it's going to work, and you just need money to optimize it or test it or scale it, then you might be too late. So one of the takeaways I have is for you to not err on waiting too late to engage with us. So we tend to fund the average company that we fund usually one time, one phase 1, one phase 2. That's pretty common. It's not unheard of for a company to have multiple phase 2 awards from us, but it's quite rare. So out of the 3,400 awards that we made here on the slide, only about a dozen of them were actually represented multiple phase 2s to the same company. So the other thing that you will see about the NSF is we try to fund as many different small businesses as we can and give these new companies a chance, rather than funding existing companies, even if they're successful, multiple times. The other thing I'll point out is that we have a very strong commercial focus, and it shows if your company gets, especially a phase 2 award from NSF, statistically speaking, that actually gives you a good shot to actually tap into follow-on funding. So over the last 6 years, we as an agency have put about $1 billion into all of our awards across different phases. But over that same time period, our portfolio companies have raised $9 billion in follow-on private capital. So a 9-to-1 ratio there. And what it shows is that if you get through our process and especially the commercial review, you tend to be set up pretty well to raise follow-on funding, which for most of you, if you really want to be really commercially successful in a big way, you're going to need more than just government grants to get there. So we really focus on trying to prepare you for the next check, the next funding source, which in almost all cases is outside the government. And we've had a lot of great successful companies that I can talk about, but just as far as the public data that we've looked at, we've tracked over 150 exits of our companies over the last 6 years. I'm not going to go through all my examples here. A few of them are in the life sciences space. The one I'll mention here is one you may be familiar with if you know about synthetic biology. It's a company called Ginkgo Bioworks. The logo is at the bottom of my slide here. Ginkgo Bioworks was a MIT spinout that engineers organisms to do various things. And they're actually interesting because they've been very high profile in the COVID crisis. So they were on 60 Minutes a couple of weeks ago talking about how they've helped to triple the amount of vaccine that is being able to be produced, the RNA in the COVID vaccine. So they've actually helped to increase vaccine output. They were also the organization that's running, I think they're running all of the testing for the public schools in the state of Massachusetts in terms of trying to get kids back into school and doing testing through that effort. So they've really done a great job trying to kind of help out with COVID-19. And they got their first funding from us over 10 years ago, and now they're, I think, valued at several $billions. So a really nice story. But as you can see from the slide, I'm not going to talk about each company, but just from the pictures, I suspect you can see that we fund a very diverse group of different companies. Okay, so how does it work? I've talked about the phases. One thing I will mention on this slide is that this phase 2B program at the bottom right is, there's a bunch of different programs that are called phase 2B in the government. Ours is a match of third-party funding. And so if you get a phase 2 award from us and you're able to bring in sales or other revenues or investment, that is a direct result of our project that's supporting the product or service that we're helping you to build, will match up to $1 million, 50 cents on the dollar. And so therefore give you access to up to another $500,000 of funding on top of your base phase 2 award. And every year, several dozen of our companies do raise that funding and do access phase 2B and make their phase 2 award much larger. So that's actually one of the ways that we try to encourage you all to go out and start building either product revenues or investments to start supporting the efforts of your company beyond the NSF funding. So how to get started. NSF has a full proposal like everybody else. We have a long, complicated document that you submit through our government systems, and I'm not going to go too much into that. That is the second stage in our process. The first step in our process, which is required, is called the project pitch. We've created this basically as a way for us to get kind of the minimum amount of information that we need from you in the fastest possible way to see if you might be a good fit for our program, so that if there's something that's definitely not a good fit, that nobody wastes their time registering with the government and putting together a full proposal. So the project pitch can be submitted online on our website. It's at seedfund.nsf.gov. It can be submitted anytime. It will go directly to the person who is the program director leading the portfolio that we think you fit in. They will respond to your pitch within, it's up to 3 weeks, but typical response time is a week. And they're going to tell you either this might be a good fit and here's where you apply and here's the topic and here's some feedback, or they're going to tell you this is not a good fit and here's why. And this is, again, the idea here is for you to do this before you have to worry about any of the other bureaucracy. So you don't need to register in SAM or DUNS or even incorporate your company to submit this pitch. So if you think you might be a good fit, this is a really easy way to get a sense that at the very least, if there's something that's way off, that we can tell you, hey, look, this is just not anywhere near what the type of thing we're going to look to fund. In case you're interested, what goes in the project pitch, it's really kind of a paragraph or two on each of these areas. The key things here are for us to make sure that you have a level of technology, innovation, and risk that are a good fit for us, and to make sure that we understand what NSF is going to be asked to pay for, what R&D, how it's going to make your product, how it's going to move it towards the market, how it's going to make your company commercially better positioned. And we also want to see that you've done some homework on the market, right? The biggest reason startups fail, including our portfolio, is not because their technology doesn't work. It's because they build something that nobody cares about. And so we want you to have started doing homework on your market even before you submit your phase 1 proposal, because why do R&D to build a product where you're not sure there's a customer yet? So you don't have to have completely mapped out your business model, but we do want to see that you've started to do some homework on customer and on value proposition and on the kind of broader market. And then most importantly, we want to understand the company and the team. One of the really critical things about the NSF is that we are very focused on, we fund a lot of startups, we fund a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, but we really want to see that the company that is applying for funding is laser focused on the thing that they're asking us to support. That the company is the number one priority of the company, the product or service that they're asking us to help them with, and that those people who are running the company, that's their number one professional goal. That's their passion. You should not take something that is a side project or a second priority for your company and apply to NSF for it. We want your full attention. We want to support what is your company's highest priority, because to be very honest, for startups, you don't usually do two things well. At most, you can hope to do one thing well as a startup, in my experience. And so we want you to focus on the one thing that you're going to do well And we want to help align our funding with that one thing. We've talked about this a lot. One of the things you should know about NSF is we ask you to do one thing at a time with us. And so we have this project pitch, and if you're invited based on that project pitch, then there's a full proposal. Companies should only be doing one of those things at a time. And if you submit a project pitch and then you are invited to submit a full proposal, you should not submit a second pitch. We want you to take that proposal through to resolution before you think about a second project. And so you're not allowed to submit 2 proposals at a time. You're not allowed to submit a proposal and a pitch at a time. Again, we ask you to do one thing at a time. And if a project pitch is not invited, you can submit another project pitch. If the proposal is declined, you can come back and you can submit another proposal. But the idea here is for you to focus on one highest priority thing, project at a time with us. As I mentioned, you can get feedback with a pitch. You can submit another pitch if you want. If you are trying to resubmit the same pitch, we ask you to work on it for 3 months and then come back. But if you have a second project, you're welcome to submit a second project. But again, we would much rather have you think about what's the most important thing for you to do and send that to us than to try to guess what NSF wants and try to somehow align what you're doing with us. Our goal is not to have you change what your company is trying to do and change your vision because you think the NSF wants something different, right? That's not going to help anybody. We want you to do what you think is what your passion is and what you think is the highest purpose for your company. Hopefully our funding is appropriate for that and can align with that vision. But if it's not, then it's probably still better for you to continue to focus on what you want to do and not try to fish around for what the government wants. A lot of information about philosophy and processes on our website. We do have quarterly submission windows for the full proposal. They're always open. And so you could theoretically apply for a full proposal anytime between now, at least until the end of the year in December. But typically we have kind of quarterly batches for full proposals. But your project pitch will give you a ticket to submit for a full year past the invitation. So I would encourage you to not to worry too much about the full proposal, to submit the project pitch and to start a dialogue with NSF, and then to start thinking about the details of proposal preparation later. That's all I have. So any questions? I guess maybe we have a little bit of time, Judy.
We do. Thank you, Ben. That's very informative and interesting comparison with the NIH presentations. They also are interested on commercial success, but you very much sound almost like a venture capitalist in what you're looking for in terms of companies. So you mentioned the quick turnaround on the project application. What is the general turnaround for the full-fledged applications once someone submits it? And how often are those calls? I think you mentioned, but they're more frequent than NIH.
So the submission windows are always open, and so you can submit anytime. The windows close every quarter, and there's typically speaking, there's a batch that the train leaves the station kind of once a quarter. Those windows typically are going to close at the beginning of March, June, September, and December. Once the window closes, it's about 4 to 6 months for the full decision, although companies may hear something before that. Eventually, the goal is to make it faster with the quarterly process, but right now we've had an unprecedented number of applications, and that's kept us kind of towards 4 to 6 months. But we had about 1,000 more proposals last year than we'd had in the highest year of history of our program. So because of that, the timing has been a little bit slowed down. But the goal is that with a normal proposal load, that will go down from 4 to 6 months, closer to about 3 months.
And a number of those proposals probably were COVID related.
Yes.
Are you still taking any COVID related, whether it's testing or?
Yeah, so again, our topics are basically as broad as the ocean, right? So anything that can make an impact on COVID will fit into one of our existing topics. We don't have any special process for COVID that like we had last year during the summer, but anything you think, any new technology that you think could fix COVID probably would theoretically fit in one of our topics, except clinical trials of a new therapeutic, of a new vaccine, for example. Those would be things that are not appropriate for us. But we continue to review and fund COVID proposals related to, devices, ventilators, disinfection, sterilization, all kinds of things. Also diagnostics as well. Actually, the first the first at-home COVID test that was approved by the FDA was a company that we funded. I think NIH funded as well back in 2015, and so we're proud of that. But we continue to have companies to bring us things in COVID, and continue to look at those.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think more funding's coming in different places down the pike, but not every agency is able to accept and review, let alone in a timely manner, just because of volume COVID applications. So we have a question: how competitive are the funding lines for NSF? How many of your submitted proposals get approved for a phase 1?
Yeah, so our process is not as quantitative as NIH's. There's no funding line, but the success rate for phase 1 proposals is between 10 and 15%. Historically, I think we probably kept to that within the last year, even though the numbers were higher, just because we are getting some extra. I mean, as you guys know, there's extra funding for NSF in the stimulus bill that was passed, and so I think the numbers will probably be similar this year. But yeah, it's quite a competitive program, and most of I think the funding rate being slightly lower is mostly on the commercial side. So. Just for folks to know that our commercial bar is quite high.
When you say it's on the commercial side, you mean that's why, you think?
I think so, yeah.
That's the weak point of the application.
I think that the technical diligence between, say, NSF and NIH and other agencies, I mean, I think we do a deep technical diligence, but I think, we don't reject anything for being in the wrong topic, right? So that's one thing we don't do. And our technical diligence is strong, but I think we bring in commercial reviewers, phase 1 and phase 2, which I think is not necessarily usual for other agencies. And the other thing I didn't mention is that, myself and all the program directors, again, we do this full time, and we really think deeply about. We make the funding decision, so there's no score. We actually make the decision ourselves. There's no panel recommendation. But we all have not only kind of have technical background in our area, but we've all either been startup founders or startup investors in a prior life. And so we bring a pretty strong kind of commercial experience and expertise to that decision-making process from those 15 or 20 startups that we've collectively been part of.
And by the way, you're extremely busy and also generous with your time. So I know we were on email late last night with a number of NSF program officers talking about the partnering system. So if you're online right now and trying to meet with program managers, they have meetings and review sessions all this week, but they were taking some time away to meet with you. Make sure you filled out your partnering request. And if they can't meet with you this week, they've agreed to follow up afterwards. We're sharing information for all the companies who requested meetings with NSF. We have a question: can the outside investment that you mentioned required for a match in part of your presentation, can that also be non-dilutive for the match requirement?
Some forms of non-dilutive funding are okay. We don't match SBIR funding from anybody, or STTR funding. And typically we limit the amount of government of grant funding that exists, because grant funding is not quite as validating on the commercial side in most cases. It depends on the source of the grant. And so what we're really looking for in that phase 2B is that the funding can be considered commercially validating. So some programs, when they fund you, they don't care about the commercialization, and some programs quite do. And we try to really, use the phase 2B as a way to match funding that is commercially validating. So it depends on the program, and if you're not sure and you want to know specifically for a given program, you can reach out offline.
So it sounds, for those who don't know, Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation is co-hosting this with us, has an SBIR, an NIH SBIR match program. Mm-hmm. And there's some contemplation, within the leaders to expand that to NSF. Mm-hmm. What you're saying, that those funds might not be able to be used because they'd be more typically grant, but that would be a new program. It's the only county mm-hmm. in the country that offers that. So maybe we can talk offline about whether or not that would be useful. But I understand what you're saying, that you are focused on commercial success. So having outside investment or product sales are things you're looking for typically to be the match.
Yeah, our experience is that, as I mentioned, there's this phase 2B, and the kind of maximum amount we call the supersize is $1 million, right? So if you get $1 million, you've kind of maxed out that opportunity. One of the things we've noticed is that if you look at our commercial outcomes, whatever measure you have of commercial success, whether it be job creation or big M&A valuation or follow-on investment or patenting or whatever it is, any of those metrics, the dominant piece of all of those outcomes is from companies that raise $1 million or more and get the phase 2B award. So out of our companies that get phase 2, about a third of them get the supersized phase 2B, and some huge amount of the outcomes are from those sort of companies. So what we have seen is that if your company is unable to raise $1 million of real validating capital during a phase 2 award, unless whether it's product sales or somebody who's given you money because your product is valuable and has a purpose and can solve a problem. If you can't do that, we have seen that it's very unlikely you actually have big commercial success. And so that's one of the reasons why we think that phase 2B is really important, because it is hard to raise money for technology companies, but after 5 years and some money from the government, if you can't do it, it's a bad sign, we've seen. So yeah, we do see that it's almost like a necessary condition that somebody else starts writing checks either during or right after your phase 2 to really have huge commercial success. I'm sure there's a few counterexamples to that, but that's almost always the pattern that we see.
So with that in mind and your focus, we do run into companies, they're developing a novel compound or, you know, a small molecule. Mm-hmm. It's a lot harder to potentially to show commercial success. How do you advise companies that are not diagnostic device and some of the things that might get to market sooner?
You know, I think it's even more important to raise funding if there's something that's going to take longer. I mean, I think the longer your path to market, the more gap there's going to be between. Maybe this isn't true. Maybe the NIH has enough funding that they can bridge this gap. But my experience, you know, we look at companies from software companies where they might be on the market by the time the phase 2 is over, all the way to the life sciences companies who have the longest timelines. And the investment becomes more and more important for the longer timeline companies. And so my advice would again be to embrace stakeholder and customer discovery from the phase 1 stage. If you start doing that at the phase 1 stage, you'll have 3 or 4 or 5 years during your phase 1 and phase 2 award to build up your ecosystem, your Rolodex of investors and customers. And the companies that do that tend to be successful raising funding. But you can't rush it. You have to live that, you know, day in and day out, and you want to start early. Even though you're not ready to raise funding from investors in phase 1, you should start building the Rolodex and the understanding of the ecosystem into which you're going to have to raise funding.
When you mentioned customer discovery, you are the NSF is the founder of the ICOR program, recognized globally now as a great program to do customer discovery. It's the scientist with that initial compound that hasn't been tested in animal models, let alone beyond, and can't get to the customer who might be a stage 4 cancer patient ultimately, or not even them. It's really the insurer, separate conversation. But so they may have more luck at the earliest stages at NIH. I think
NIH does some great. I mean, NIH does ICOR, and they do ICOR specifically for life sciences. I think ICOR is the hardest. I mean, ICOR is great for I think all kinds of companies, but they definitely have to. It's definitely a little different for like drug companies, right? I mean, just because it's less likely that somebody's going to want a cure for cancer, right? That's the idea. Like, okay, why do I have to talk to customers? There's still a lot of stakeholder engagement that I think exists, but you're right. It does have to be considered a little differently for those kind of for those big blockbuster pharmaceutical, like therapeutics especially. But I think the thing that is important is that there's always somebody outside your lab who knows things that are going to help your company be more successful. It may not be the customers or users, but it may be regulatory people, right? And so I think that the discipline of every day going out and trying to think about your business model and thinking about who do I interview, who do I talk to, who's going to help me build my business model and my understanding of my market. And so even if it's not customers or users, like you said, maybe you don't need to talk to a cancer patient about whether they want to direct to cure cancer, but there are people in that ecosystem who are decision makers, who are important, who you need to talk to, the payers, the buyers, and people around the regulatory piece. And if your company gets in a habit of just doing that with all pieces of your business model, it's a really powerful tool.
I think that's great advice. And I see we're out of time. I want to have one last question. So at NIH, everyone was encouraged to talk to the program officers, do a little research on the institute, speak with the program officers, and make sure there's alignment. Your topic area is very broad. You've described the project pitch process. Is it your preference that folks submit a pitch and then a program officer will follow up with you, or Do they try to reach one of you first? How do you prefer? What's most effective?
You know, again, like I said, we're open to lots of people who don't know the process. So you're not going to screw things up with us. You're not going to break any unsaid rules. I do think the project pitch, unless there's something you're not clear about prior to that stage, I think the project pitch is a pretty light lift. And it will, first of all, it will tell you whether you're a good fit. Second of all, the person who responds to it will be the program director who's going to make the funding decision on your proposal. So you'll know the topic, you'll know whether you're a good fit, and you'll know the person to talk to. So I think that gives you some good information. You're welcome to reach out at any time, but if we have that project pitch, that also gives us a really good head start on talking to you, right? We can read through it. We know who the people are in the company and what the company's trying to do and like what the work is going to be. And so I guess the most common way people would try to do it would probably be to submit the project pitch and then follow up to the program director who invited the pitch. But yeah, there's no wrong way to do it. You know, all of us, this is what we do all day, right? The NSF program directors. We don't work on any other programs. We don't work on basic research. We work with startups all day, and we love talking to entrepreneurs. That's one of the reasons we like this program. That's where the action is. We've all been there. We have a huge admiration for people who start companies and build something from nothing. So we're very busy, and try to be efficient so that you can use our time effectively. But we love talking to new entrepreneurs. So feel free to reach out.
Great. Well, the project pitch does sound to be the most efficient way, and thank you for taking your time to talk with all these entrepreneurs today. And I'll ask you separately, or now if we were able to share your slides in some or part. I've had that request already. Okay, thanks. Thank you very much, and hello to Team NSF for us.